All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Christina Caesar, and I'll be moderating today's session. So today's webinar is the second part in a webinar series inspired by our speaker, Adrian Amos's recent blog post featuring his 2021 security prognostication, which analyzes the key security tools and features that we think will gain serious momentum in 2021. If you want to read the blog post, it's on the blog post on our website. Today's is on Azure Information Protection, should add. Just a reminder, this session is being recorded, and please make sure to send any questions through the Q&A function within Teams. Just a little bit about us. Synergy Technical is an IT consulting firm headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. We have clients in over 70 countries in all 50 states and manage over 2 million licenses of Microsoft 365 for our clients through our licensing and managed services practice. Just last February of 2020, we were awarded the Microsoft 365 Security Deployment Partner of the Year award. And a large part of that success is the work done by today's presenter, Adrian Amos. Adrian is a deep-level Microsoft security expert who has had the honor of running both productivity and security workshops at Microsoft Ignite 2019 and 2020, or 2018 and 2019, sorry. So he seems the perfect person to be leading today. I don't remember what year it was. Adrian, if you want to turn on your mic.
Yeah, sorry, I was having a little bit of a PC slowdown right there. So thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. As I'm doing that, are you transitioning to me? Sorry, I had a little bit of a PC bobble there for a second. All right, I think we're good. All right, so thank you for joining. We are coming to you live from deep in the country in Hanover County, where we're in the middle of an ice storm. I had pre-recorded a copy of this whole event just in case I wasn't able to do this live late last night. I am so glad, though, that I don't have to rely on that recording because it was capped at 30 minutes, and there was a lot to try to pack into 30 minutes. So today we are digging into Azure Information Protection, what it's capable of doing, where we can run into some limitations and some pitfalls. And this is part of the prognostication series, right? We did talk about Azure Sentinel last month. We're talking about Azure Information Protection this month. We're talking about remote deployment next month, and then we're going to end this series with endpoint DLP. And I know DLP is a really big issue for a lot of organizations out there. And part of the reason why we're touching both of these, but not at the same time, is there seems to be a conflation in a lot of cases between DLP and Azure Information Protection and what we really can get out of those. So we can use one to build on the other, and we'll get to that in a later event, like I said. But right now we're going to dig into Azure Information Protection, what it is. So Azure Information Protection is Microsoft's cloud-based sensitivity and file and content protection service. It enables us to create labels, apply those labels to content, and have that content be persistently protected no matter where the data goes, no matter what somebody tries to do with it. We're going to be able to enable the right amount of access to the right data for the right amount of time for the right people, up to and including potentially guest users getting into our data. So this is one of the very, very few spaces in the entirety of the Microsoft 365 experience where there's a couple of things that are really important before you get into it. A lot of things in the Microsoft 365 you can totally get rolling without a plan and figure it out as you go and tweak things and build parallel structures and just keep on rolling. AIP is not one of them. And there's a couple reasons for it. One is it's user facing. So you're going to present users with labels. They will work with those labels. You're going to ask them to learn how to use those labels appropriately. And if you change the labels on them, they may get frustrated. They may stop using the appropriate labels. They may label everything to open defaults, and you might lose a little bit of traction there. The other thing that's really important to understand is that there are a few things on the back end that are changing right now. And this is one of those technologies that has gone through several major iterations. And I want to talk a little bit before we even dig into it about what those iterations have been, where this product has come from, because it really helps understand some of the naming mismatches that you will see today. Azure Information Protection is the evolution of rights management. Rights management being like, can you open the file? Can you then also print the file? Can you then also make changes to the file? Can you then also, save it to whatever you want, move the file around, do what you want to with it? Can you expose it to others? Can you screen share it? Can you do these sorts of things? We've had rights management since the Active Directory days. And when that technology was first ported into the Azure space, it came in as Azure Rights Management Service. So you will see today, I promise you, you will see Azure RMS in a couple of screens. It's not really called that anymore, but there is still a core technology at the base of it that is Azure RMS. So that's still a thing, but we build rights management, or we build information protection on top of RMS to do much more granular controls, much more sculpted and tailored experience. That's 2014, and you're actually going to see a little bit of the dashboard from 2014 in the space too. So there's a couple things that are still a little bit. You have to know the past to work with the future. Then it moved into the first version of Azure Information Protection, and that is going off support April 1, 2020. Not even going off support, it's being retired. It's being flat out done. You're gone. So what that is a non-unified approach to rights management. It allowed you to create labels. You would build them here in the old Azure portal, and you would be able to see your classifications. They were called classification labels. It extended to your basic Office products. You could look and dig into the templates and do things like that. But this is, as said right here, going away. This is end of life, April 1, 2021. And what you're going to need to do before April 1st of this year is you're going to need to come down here if you have those classic labels defined, and you're going to need to convert them to unified labels. It's generally pretty simple, unless you have some really wackadoodle rules defined in your labels and what they should do. Generally, you can simply hit activate and it'll switch them over. There are a couple of client ramifications to that. The classic Azure labeling policy, labeling agent does not support unified labels and vice versa. So there is a migration process. Remove the old agent, activate the rules, install the new agent. You're off to the races. We're getting ahead of ourselves. But you have to understand, we came from AD RMS to Azure RMS to Azure Information Protection with classification policies or classification labels, and now we're at Azure Information Protection with unified sensitivity labels. History lesson done. You will see those names. We're going to dig into this a little bit. This whole experience is going to start at the unified now compliance.microsoft.com space. If we scroll down a little bit here, we're going to see that there are some things that might trip us up and drag us into some rabbit holes. We will come back and look at a little bit of this later. There's data classification, not where we're starting. We're skipping down past data loss prevention. We're skipping past information governance to information protection. And that's now where we are building our labels, our sensitivity labels. And in my Contoso environment, I have several built here. I have some that are nested within others. There is actually a prioritization order. There's best practices about how many labels you should expose to your users, and I'm not following it in this environment. I have several here, but generally, these are not necessarily, by the way, this is not necessarily what the user is going to see. So we'll get to that in a second. We're going to define what our labels are. We're going to give them an order of precedence. We're going to be able to nest labels inside of other labels. And then once we've got our labels created and the actions that should be associated with those labels, then we're going to package up these labels and publish them as policies. So think of this in the traditional Active Directory sense of like, I'm building my GPOs, but I'm not assigning them yet. I'm building them and I'm putting them in the GPO bank. This is my GPO bank, essentially. So this is my label bank, but some of my things do carry over. The nesting carries over into how the users interact with these things. So let's dig in and see what a label can include. In my case, I'm going to go first. Actually, let's go straight to finance. Why not? Finance label in this environment is going to define a few actions that should take place on content that's been tagged this way. And I'll show you in a minute how we're going to tag it too. So at a glance here, we should see that there's a name, there's a display name, there's a description for users to be able to interact with. There's actually also an administrative description too, so we can see what we want to see. We can scope this thing to different data types that exist in our Office or Microsoft 365 space. We can define whether we want this label to cause encryption. We can then also define watermarking that we want to have on this, including where the watermark should appear, what color it should be, how big, all that kind of fun stuff. We can define policies for automatically applying this stuff, and then we can apply it to groups and sites. So let's dig into that and see what that looks like. So we're going to get past the name. We're going to define what kind of content should be marked with this label, right? Files and emails, yes, okay, no problem. Groups and sites, this is new. And as of like a couple of weeks ago, this still said preview around it. It doesn't say preview anymore. It's pretty cool. We're going to dig into it in just a little bit here. I'm going to skip past this. We're not doing anything with SQL or blob storage right now in this environment, so we'll come back to that. When we hit these things, what should we do? Encrypt, add watermarks. Now, each one of these pages, these are still, even though this is the newest new that's new, this is still kind of following a flow that dates back to some really old Azure technology. So the flow doesn't really match the way that we're going to do things. We're defining what the main actions are, and then we're going to go in and get granular with those actions. So in our case, we earlier said, yes, we want to encrypt. Now we get to the encryption definition page. We're going to come in here. We're going to say encrypt these things. We're going to assign permissions for the user, but we can also allow users to decide what they want to do. We can decide if this is a Mission Impossibles type file. It's going to self-destruct on June 1st or X number of days after the label is applied. If someone wants to take this file or this email or this whatever, and they want to access it and work with it offline, we're going to allow them to do that for a certain amount of time. Maybe it can be forever, maybe it can be not at all, but we can define how many days, up to 100 days, that they can have this content available without checking into Azure. Now, this is really powerful. And right, when I used to get to travel around the country and do this with live machines and showing everybody all this cool stuff, one of my favorite things that people would try to do was I would send a file that was encrypted and marked for only a couple of days worth of online access or offline access, sorry. And people would try to steal the file and send it to their own home email so they could work with it later. Well, the first thing that happens when someone tries to access one of these files, doesn't matter what computer it's on anywhere in the world, it reaches back to my Azure tenant and tries to check in and says, hey, this access is coming from this user on this device. Is this permitted? And no, it's not. But guess what? I got a log on it. And generally, within a couple of days of an event, my phone would start walking across my desk with notifications that people were trying to play with my file that they had surreptitiously copied to their own USB drives, taken out, whatever, no big deal. Now, not only are we defining what the permissions are, the encryption level, then we can go in and actually assign which groups, which accesses should exist in this. And this is where we get into that RMS, right? Defining what are the actual rights. Are we going to do it for everybody in the organization? Are we going to add specific users and groups? Then once we've defined what these groups should be, what kind of permissions should they have? Are they a co-author, a reviewer? You see they're losing some stuff here. Are they a viewer? Or are we going to go in and set really granular specific controls that they should be able to work with inside of this document or this email or this whatever? This is some ancient stuff right here. This is Vue circa 2014 right here. But you can see we can get down to users and groups. We can define anybody who's able to authenticate to the system, right? Define this to specific domains too. So if you've got users that are isolated in one domain versus another, we can get down to that level. And we can get in here and add very specifically, whatever user, whatever group. So we can go down to specific user. And again, there's rules to tailor even who's going to be able to be a guest who has access into this stuff. We also now have the ability to leverage double key encryption. And this is taking the Azure information protection and also layering onto it some other key encryption capability that Azure can't see, but we're labeling into it as well. So in that case, in this pretty rare scenario, you're generally taking your on-premises rights management and layering it in with the Azure information protection. We don't see that often. We're also coming in and defining what the content marking should look like. Are we adding a header? How big should it be? What color should it be? What corner of the page should it be on, right? Footers, watermarks, we can do the big, the watermark that puts confidential data in a big diagonal line across the middle of it so it looks like top secret military grade information. We can also decide that if we're looking at sensitive information types found within the content, to just skip asking the user what they want to do with it and just apply these rules. This thing is going to be financial data if we detect more than 2 credit card numbers in this thing. And these sensitive information types come incidentally from this data loss prevention section over here. So there is a correlation between AIP and DLP and all that kind of fun stuff, but they're not quite the same thing. Then we can get into defining what kind of protections we want to have for groups and sites. We're not going to deal with that too much. Azure Purview will be a conversation that we will have later on. And then we set our rules. We define what we want to have happen with this thing. We save it. And then now it's time to publish this. Because again, all we've done is we put this into our bank, right? Our label bank. So that's my label done. All my labels are set up here. I want to then take a set of these labels and publish these. Now, there's a little bit of a misnomer or a naming mismatch between these two things, right? So I have my labels and it said published labels over here. When I publish my labels, I get a label policy, but within this, I can also choose to publish label. So there's singular, plural, they do the same thing, just kind of a little bit of a weird naming mismatch that happens here. With my labels defined, now I'm going to build my policies that's going to deploy these labels to certain groups of users. I'm going to have an order of precedence, and you've got to get this order right. If you get this order wrong, certain labels that you want some users to see may not show up for them, because we can stack these policies up to present a longer and longer list of labels, sub-labels, whatever, to our users. And I promise we will show you what it all looks like from the end user perspective very soon. But at Contoso, we have decided that all users, from the loading dock to the executive boardroom, are going to have at least these 3 labels available to them. They're going to be able to mark content as personal. So there's no risk to the organization. It belongs to you. You take it with you. There's no encryption. There's general. Okay, it's corporate data, but there's no real restrictions. And internal, which we saw earlier, will define encryption rules for internal content. I can get into these things and define, add a label to this list if I want to, define which users and groups will see these labels. And this is really important, right? This is where I'm going to get in, and you're going to see in a little bit. I've got a couple of labels that are scoped to specific user groups that nobody else can see. And you can get yourself into trouble if you do it wrong. So I'm going to show you that too. When users are working with these things, we can come in here and we can say, hey, by default, everybody who's working in labels is going to automatically get the general label applied to their content when they go to save or move it around. If they want to lower it, they can, but they must provide a justification to explain why they have lowered it. And if they try to move content around or save it or create it or whatever without labeling it, they're going to get a pop-up that says, what kind of data is this, right? General labeling policy, this isn't really something that surfaces to the user, so you don't really need to worry about this, but define it and build it, and that's it. There's not a lot to it. Now, when I get into my highly confidential policies or my executive sub-labeling policies, if I look at this one for InfoSec, you can see that it's below the default labeling policies. So anybody working in InfoSec is going to have these, but then they're also going to get this. And now you notice that I have this sub-label defined here. This is published to one specific group here. It's going to say that labeling is mandatory, just like this, just like the other one. They must provide a justification to lower it. Now, let's jump into working with the computer and being the user for just a minute before I even get into auto-labeling, which we'll come back to. So for the user, we've done all this work. We've built our bank. We've published our policies. We've given them these things. What the heck are they going to do with it? As Alan, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hit new email within Outlook. And because my labels are unified and they exist across all the Microsoft 365 toolset, when I create a new email or when I create a new Word document, you're going to see this consistent experience within the new content space, right? What is this content? This sensitivity. If I want to go the harder way, there's actually the ability to also click on the sensitivity dropdown here, but we've got it set to show the bar, which is a function of the Azure Information Protection client that's installed on this machine. So Alan is going to come in here and he's going to say, oh, this is highly confidential data, but look, now he can drop down. If he had more than one thing there, he'd have a list of choices here. This is where we get into, I didn't do it right, you do better than me. Microsoft recommends that you not make more than 5 labels visible to a user. I've got 6, I made a choice. When you get into the point where you need to make more labels visible to the user, it ought to be through dropdowns. It ought to be very simple to understand. There is internal content. There might be departmental and internal content. There's highly confidential content, and that might be departmental in nature or maybe project-based. But you generally want to keep the number of labels small, somewhere between 3 and 5 at the top level, cascade down from there. If you give them too many labels, they're going to choose, oh, it's general. They're going to take the hands off the wheel and they're going to say, it's too much. I can't work with it. It's true. They really will, I promise. So this is now marked as general within Outlook. Okay, I'm going to have the exact same capability and experience here. I'm going to come in, I'm going to mark this as highly confidential InfoSec, and there we got a watermark on it. Well, I said, whoa, hold on a second. This is actually finance data. Okay, so I was able to drop that down. You see I got a different watermark type on this. No big deal. When I'm on the web, though, my experience is a little bit different. In this case, because I'm in web apps and the unified labeling client can't work with that, I have to actually go to the sensitivity tab here, and I can move the sensitivity label here. Oh, couldn't apply the label on this. Well, I probably need to go back and change it. Aha, here we go. Justification required to change it. Previous label was incorrect. Yep, change it. There we go. That should allow me to go through there. And then if I'm in Outlook as well on the web, same experience here too. When I create a new message, my computer's a little bit slow. It's handling a lot of things going on. Here's that same sensitivity button raised up for the user. They can decide this is general content, right? And when they send this, the recipient doesn't actually have to have the same licensing to be able to get into this. They simply need to be listed as somebody who's in that permission set defined in the label over here to be able to work with that content. So yes, there is a license necessary to create the content. No, there is not a license necessary to consume the content. That's an important distinction, right? But Alan is now able to come in, define the sensitivity pretty simply in both Outlook on the web and Word on the web and within his actual applications. He's getting the watermark content. He's able to see what is the risk, what is the ramification, what am I defining? And these protections are persistent. This file, even with nothing really in it, if he emails it to me as an encrypted file that I'm not listed on the people who can access it, there's nothing I can do to get this file. I mean, nothing I can do. I can make 1 million copies of it. I can send it around to every Russian hacking website in the world. They're not going to be able to get into it. All they're going to do is try again to open it. They're going to get blocked over and over again. If I were to try to put this content into a screen sharing session with somebody who didn't have access, they would not be able to see it. If I tried to do something like problem steps recorder or even do a screen cap and share that, none of these things would be able to capture this content. This would all be blacked out. So there would be no accidental oversharing of this content. So, all right, we've given Alan the tools, right? We've seen a little bit about what the experience looks like on his computer. We can also then go back and encrypt or protect the content that exists in our online experience, in our digital estate. What we are able to do is create an auto-labeling policy. And when we create these, they start in a simulation mode. They go out and they look and they say, based on the criteria you have chosen, which again are fed by these DLP sensitive info type rules, we have found that there are this number of matched items based on, in this case, we chose the HIPAA policy template, and we said, look for social security numbers, DEA numbers, classifications of diseases numbers. We then ran this simulated search across all of our Azure connected experiences, and it pulled back, in my case, no items. In your case, it might say that there are 55,000 files that would be matched. You would have then a list. You could see, hey, these are the things I can do. These are the things I can't do. You'd be able to review it. You'd be able to tweak it and edit it. And then when you're happy with the things that it says it's going to encrypt, you hit publish policy, and it goes out and it just fixes it. It sets the permissions the way that you would want them to be on an ongoing basis. There is an equivalent tool for this for offline files, for on-premises files. If you have file servers that you're looking to ingest from your on-premises environment into the cloud, there is an AIP Scanner tool that works in very much the same way. It goes out, you install it on a machine, it checks against your Azure information protection policies and labels, and it says, hey, based on these things that you've defined, these would be the files that I would encrypt if I had the access or if I had the rights to do it right now. What do you want to do? Do you want to encrypt them in place? Do you want to just be notified? So we have the ability to search against both our online digital estate and our on-premises digital estates, define what kind of content we want to protect, and decide whether or not to protect it in place. Now, what's really neat is that by having simply, as Alan clicked on the finance button in here, I have now created an auditable event. And I don't know if the audit will catch up as quickly as the event, but when users click the buttons now and protect the files, that data is registered through the Office applications and reported back to this data classification service. So I said we would come back to this data classification. Here we are. We can look and see what kind of sensitive information is being used in the or is being seen in the organization, what labels are being applied, how those labels are being applied, whether they're being applied in Exchange or in SharePoint, whether it's, in some cases, we can actually get down and see whether it's the user applying the labels or the system applying the labels for themselves or for it by itself. And if I click on View Details in the Azure Information Protection Portal, that's what's going to take me to here, and it's going to show me this usage report. So I can look through this and I can see that these labels that I have published are actually being used. I can also incidentally see if there are labels that I have published that no one is using. And I can track this across users and devices and protections, and I can see activity logs for things that are happening with my data. Are labels being upgraded? Did somebody log in and recognize that this data was not protected at the appropriate level and they raised it up, right? I can see that there's new label activity, there's discovery things happening. I can see again what devices are messing with it. Again, I can also track this across, and this is going to lead us into some really interesting touch points and integrations. And I can't believe I'm actually at 30 minutes already. There's so much here. We can track what kind of labels are on machines through pretty much the entire connected 365 space, right? So now I'm into Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is their EDR, XDR, EPP, all the labels, all the names and everything. Tracking for what kind of incidents are happening on our machines and auto remediating against that. Now, looking at Alan's machine, I can see on here that Alan has recently worked with highly confidential data, right? He's got access to that InfoSec label. And so now within the last 30 days, InfoSec data has been seen on this machine. If this machine is associated with part of an incident, I'm going to want to do a little bit more careful work to make sure that I'm triaging this appropriately because I'm seeing this sensitive information surfacing here. And that's also reflected down here in the data sensitivity space right here as well. Now, it gets even more complicated too, because again, I also have Cloud App Security connected to this, and I'm able to go through the entirety of, like I said, my digital estate in the cloud and look at all the files that exist out here, whether they're in OneDrive for Business or SharePoint Online or in any of these connected applications that come up in this drop-down list that I have administrative access into. I can see the files that are out there. I can see what files are protected with Azure Information Protection right here. I've got this little doohickey button right here. And I can look at this and say, okay, well, this is in OneDrive and it looks like it's encrypted and it looks like it has the finance tag. If I'm happy with that, that's great. Let's see, maybe I've got some stuff out here. Okay, that's an encrypted one, but it's not surfacing the tag. So there's a little bit of a differentiation here between what things are showing up where they should be. Here is a file that is not protected. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's not okay. I can come in here and decide, though, that I want to protect it. Now, again, I did tell you there's a history to this, that we used to call these things classification labels. This is where it's hitting us, right? I can look at this file and say, this is Patty's thing. It's in SharePoint Online. She's shared a tag on everybody. Maybe we want to just make this to be an internal document. And that's it. I don't have to know how to find that file. I don't have to be an expert in SharePoint Online. I can just do that. But I can also do even better than that. I can create a policy in Cloud App Security that says, hey, you know what? I'm really worried that data that's inside of my R&D directory in SharePoint Online maybe isn't being protected at the right level. Now, what I want to do then is I want to say at a particular folder structure, I want to have a specific classification label applied, and that is, in this case, internal. So what I'm able to do here is create a file policy that searches for the parent folder matching this research and development space inside of my SharePoint Online. And then, is it matching? Is it doing things? And yeah, it sure as heck is. It's found all of these different files, and it presented me with an option of, do I authorize the change or do I just leave it as it is? So I can grab all of these guys and say all in page and say, do it. Make the change, protect these things in place. I don't even want to worry about it. Right there, you can see it's already grabbed one. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about our policies that exist here too. This one, again, when you get into create these policies, you kind of have to know the specific file structure. But we also then have the ability to take our protections that exist from a particular policy and apply them through Windows information protection. Now, this is not a common use case that we see either, but we do have the ability to leverage, again, this is that history lesson coming back, an Azure Rights Management Service template to say that folders and files protected with Windows information protection at the endpoint should have the permissions associated with that policy label or that label. And that's a little bit of a weird way to say it, but essentially what we're saying is, whatever this particular template ID is, and you only get that from going over to here and looking through and digging through that, whatever is associated with that, whether it's the finance team has access to it and no one else, or everyone has reviewer permissions or whatever, any content that has that exists inside of this space is going to get that set of permissions. This will not encrypt, and that's why it says RMS and not AIP, because it's not the full AIP capability set. It's just the RMS, defining what the rights management capabilities are. All right, let's get a little bit more granular. One of the things that you saw me having the ability to do over here when I was creating labels was assign this stuff to groups and sites. And that's really new, and I'm really excited about it. And what we can do is we can come into a specific group, and it has to be very specifically either a Microsoft 365 group. Actually, now they are all in my environment. They're all Microsoft 365 group. You can't do this to a security group. When you come into any one of these groups, you have the ability to assign a sensitivity label to it. Over here at my sensitivity labels in my information protection, I only have 2 labels that are surfaceable to groups. So we'll give that a second to show up here, and we see unified group here and unified group here. So only finance and InfoSec should be assignable to groups. So if I look at my finance group, the sensitivity label here is either finance or, ooh, highly confidential. That doesn't say InfoSec. When we deal with nested labels, we don't have the ability to surface the name of the nested group into this into this setting for the group. But we can fix that at the actual content. It's going to be a little bit of a weird way to work around it, but it's true. So I've got my finance label set here. And as my good buddy Diego over here, Diego is in finance. Diego created a team and he logged into it and he associated that team with that Azure Active Directory group. And as a result, all content in this team is marked with the finance sensitivity label. And it gets better than that too, because if he decides that he wants to open this content in SharePoint, then we can also see that that finance label has followed us to SharePoint. So the content that exists inside this team, whether it's conversations or whatever that kind of stuff might be, it's going to be protected with the finance tag. Now there's one major trick here. Actually, there's two, and I'll show you one on Alan. I'll show you one here. Files do not necessarily get that same protection level. Posts and chat do, files do not. There's an assumption that because Teams is built on chat, that you've labeled this team to match what the chat should be protected at, but there you should not be necessarily limited to protecting the files at that level. So what that means for us is that simply dumping files into this does not work like in TFS, where we simply land the permission or the permissions match where the content lands. Does not work like that. We can dump data in here, but then we still have to go in and define what the sensitivity label for that should be. Now, again, we're back up here at posts. We can see that the finance team thing has come through, right? Just for comparison's sake, so we're seeing private group and finance. If we come over to this one, this does not have a sensitivity label assigned to it, so it's a different experience. Alan, on the other hand, though, as the owner of the InfoSec team, he has a new group that he's defined in here that is, well, let me come in here and hit edit here. So we saw that when we tried to assign the InfoSec label to a group in the cloud here. So let me come back and I'll show you that again. Let me go back to groups and I'll hit InfoSec. It's a slightly interesting experience that happens here. So I can come in and define what my sensitivity label is. Again, I don't see InfoSec here. I hit save on that. But when I come in to set up my labeling here, I'm initially presented with highly confidential. I then have to choose InfoSec beside that. Once that's done, I'm now going to see that label. Now, depending on the version of your team's client, users may see InfoSec or they might see highly confidential. That is a thing that there was a note in the message center last week that the labeling naming convention is flipping from which one the users will see, but there may be a slightly inconsistent experience in your tenant right now based on the way that where the nesting labels works. All right, wow, we have covered a lot of ground. We've got our labels defined here in our web apps. We've got our labels defined here in our on-prem, in our actual applications. We can choose things, we can move things around. When we mail things to other people, they're able to see the content. In fact, I'll go ahead and send this to Diego right now, just so you can see what the recipient sees on the receiving end here. And there we go. He's going to send that to Diego. And Diego on the receiving end here, see. I hope I sent it out the right way and not backward, because that would be just my way of doing things, to have sent that from Diego to Diego. But I promise it's pretty simple. Users can work with it. You can actually include guests into your labeling experience too, and get some really granular control. Make sure that the content that you are sharing, even with if it's like with an external partner, if you need to sever that relationship, you actually still own permissions to access that content. The content protections are persistent. This is probably the single most important thing to land out of all of this, is you do have consistent, persistent labeling protections for your data, kind of no matter where it ends up living. And you just want to make sure that you're not presenting too many users with too many different labels. And that's kind of the whole story, right? That's about 40 minutes worth. I'm happy to open it up to any questions you guys may have. And I'm going to pass it back over to Christina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adrian. That was awesome, especially given the ice storm we're in right now. And
oh my Lord.
your location We did it. Well, you did it. So I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A right now. If anyone wants to pop any in there. But thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today. You will receive a follow-up email with the recording to this by tomorrow. In the future, please be sure to keep up with us on social or check our events page for more upcoming webinars. The next webinar in this series is actually scheduled for March 18th next month, and it's on remote provisioning. So you can find the registration for that on the events page on our website. But yeah, if there's no questions, thank you so much for joining us. Adrian, thank you so much. You crushed it as always. And yeah, we will see y'all next time. Everybody stay warm. It's crazy weather. I don't know where everyone is.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.